Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today's Tuesday, September 26th, 2023. Tonight's broadcast is about behavioral contracts, what we've considered in the past behavioral contracts. And what I'm going to call this evening, this is just something that I've made up for our version of the behavioral contract, calling it a home agreement. And it's not a new idea, but I want to make a little bit of a shift this evening. So I'm going to talk about the value of home agreements, what's different about the way that we think about and see home agreements, and the lessons in parenting that are learned from thinking about those issues. Before I get into tonight's topic, I want to announce again, upcoming next year, February 7th through 11th, we will be hosting, and I'll be the one facilitating the Finding Connection workshop. This will be for 4 couples. So if you're interested in doing your work, and if you've wondered, can I come with my spouse? This is the event for you. This is the process for you. This is like doing your Finding You, but doing it with your partner. We've even had people that have done, one of the partners has even done a Finding You, and they brought back their partner. So this is for you to have an opportunity to do your own work in front of your partner. So you have to have some level of trust and safety with that partner. That's one of the reasons why we're reluctant, is because sometimes that can be difficult in stepping into the work. But if you're ready for that, if you want to do couples work, if you want to see not only from your own family, from your own background, from your own marriage, how your historical issues relate to the challenges that you might be having today, but like all of our intensive, and maybe more this one than any, watching other folks, watching other couples do their work is as illuminating and instructive as is your own work. And people say that consistently in our programs. So I just want to make that announcement. It will fill up ahead of time. I want to talk tonight about this idea of the home agreement and the curriculum, the way that we think about it. Instead of a behavioral contract or a contract, Evoke prefers to use the term home agreement. That being said, I'll also share with you at the end of my broadcast this evening our version, our ideas about the home contract. But there's some things about it that I think make it unique, and thinking about planning for that. So let's start with this. The goal of Evoke is to support parents in transforming the way that they think and interact with their children. I talk about that a lot, that idea of transformation of thinking about things at a new level, on a new level. As Einstein once remarked, we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. Thus, contracts and its behavioral focus are just more of the same. Likely you've tried them in the past and they haven't worked. We help parents to see beneath the symptoms to the underlying root issues. Fundamentally, and I'm going to talk about this quite a bit this evening, when you're thinking about parenting, I've seen a quote recently that says, parenting is only difficult for good parents. And at first I kind of dismissed it. But as I thought about it, I think that that's true in a lot of ways, that it's difficult because those of us that are struggling with it are trying. We're trying to evolve. We're trying to learn. We're trying to meet our challenges with creativity and groundedness and authenticity and wisdom. We try to help you see beneath the symptoms. And what I mean by that is, more important than reducing the reduction of a human being, a child, to their good and bad behaviors, the attachment trumps everything. And that is the relationship. I know for myself, when I thought about my children, when I had my first child over 30 years ago, my thought was, I'm going to shape them up and to be the best version of myself. I'm going to take all that I've learned, and in my case, it was a lot from trial and error and mistakes that I made in my own childhood. I'm going to, like most parents, think I'm going to repair or fix or change the things that my parents did that I didn't like or that didn't work. And I'm going to shape my child, guide them to become the kind of the best version of myself and my wife. That was my thinking. I don't know that I would have articulated it that then. It was just my effort to do well that was in my body, was in my brain. But now looking back, I can see that way. What I think about now, almost 31 years later, is that my job is to support the child to become the best version of themselves. And in some ways, this is really important. Some of the wisdom, some of the insight, some of the unique perspective that our children have are beyond our framework. My 15-year-old said to us a handful of months ago, I've shared this a couple of times. She said out of the blue after, I think she took it away from one of her own therapy sessions, which she chose to go to. She said to us, to us, her mom and dad, she said, I realize this is the first time that you guys are doing this. And she paused, and I was surprised by the offering. And she says, and it's the first time for me too, going through this. And I thought about how profound that was. It was so profound because this was my fourth child. This is my fourth child. So it's not the first time that I've raised a child, but it's the first time that I've raised this child. And it's the first time that I've raised any child at the age of 15 in 2023 with all of the variables that are present in today's society, all of the stressors, all of the challenges that I personally experienced in my own life, in my career, in my marriage. And so there's such a compassionate idea in there. But thinking about that, I've been thinking about it lately with this youngest one. She's a lot like my first one. The two middle ones were more of the pleasers, and the first one and the last one are more of the rebels. And the last one being more like the first one, I thought to myself, I'm going to try to do it differently. And I'm going to put my proverbial money where my mouth is, and I'm going to focus not on the good and bad behaviors. I'm not going to get tired. I'm not going to ignore them. I'm not going to turn a blind eye to them, but I'm not going to allow them to trigger me. I'm not going to allow them to throw me into future tripping, as people like to call it, looking into the future and wringing my hands about how this child is going to turn out based on what she's doing right now. And I'm going to focus on the relationship and the attachment. I remember I was talking to one of my daughter's siblings, and they said, aren't you worried that some of the things that she's doing, because she's, in a lot of ways, she's more mature than the other three, or at least some pseudo maturity, meaning that she's exposed to a lot more adults and a lot more adult conversations than were my first two children. So she has that unique perspective. And in a lot of ways, my 15-year-old, in terms of the culture that the circles that she runs in, the music that she listens to, the friends that she associates with, are much more advanced socially than my third born. My third born has, and to this day, has a very childlike sensibility. And my fourth born, much like me, is very eager to get out of childhood, very eager to learn by her own experience. And with that comes lots of mistakes, lots of sidetracks. But back to the point, I thought to myself when I was asked by one of her siblings, are you worried about some of the things that she's done or been involved in? And I said, of course I am. That's the first answer. But the second answer is the relationship between us is good. And I'm going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on listening. I'm going to focus on understanding. I'm going to focus on my own work always, continuing to evolve. It's not like I do my work and therefore I know today all that I need to know. I'm going to have to do it again tomorrow. I'm going to have to unlearn things that even today I still believe or that still have their hold on me so that I can be present with her. And no matter what she gets into in her life, that relationship is going to be my priority. And with that relationship, I feel like we can make it through this. And it's not easy. It is difficult and challenging at times to keep my focus on the attachment and to not get distracted by the behaviors. And I, what you do with that is your choice, of course. And you might all be asking me, I can imagine several of you thinking of the question to ask me by the end of this, but what do you do in these circumstances when your child is behaving this way? And that's a fair question. That's a question that I probably would be asking if the roles were reversed. And yet what I'm going to say to you is, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell you to do. I know that my understanding of attachment and its impact on development informs me. I know that in some ways I'm more liberal than I was 10 or 15 years ago in my parenting. In some ways, maybe not. I'm more confident, more clear. And again, I put on the list of a hierarchy of what deserves my attention, and the behaviors, the mistakes fall lower than they used to. I used to get really triggered and really attached to good and bad behaviors. So it's this vision of attachment, our understanding universally. We know this, that the greatest contribution you can make to your child is the attachment that you have with them. We know that from the research and practice in attachment theory. It's not how strict you are or permissive you are. And there are going to be things that you might be strict about now that you weren't before, or even in the future that you might let go of, and vice versa. Those are going to be ever changing. It's your connection, not just the trust that you have for them. This kind of goes to the heart of tonight's presentation. So many people think about, can I trust my child? That's interesting for sure. It matters. But much, much more important is, can they trust you? And I'm not talking about whether or not you tell the truth. I'm talking about, can they trust you as a person that they can go to co-regulate with? That you're taking care of your historical trauma and its impact on the triggers that you feel today well enough that when they come to you in a crisis, that you're not going to panic. I've said this, it's been probably 9 months, 10 months since I've used this example, and it works visually, but I think it also works if you just hear what I'm saying. If your child comes to you and your response is to gasp, they share something with you and your response is to gasp, something like, with a sense of alarm, what they know about you is that you're not safe. You're not a safe person to go to. And part of what you want to set up, what you want to establish, is ideally you want to be the person that your child calls in a crisis when they're in a really bad hole and situation. You don't want to be the last call. You want to be the first call, ideally. And that means you have to be doing your daily work to stay regulated under things that might cause others or even you in the past a great deal of anxiety and fear. So you can be there for them, so you can offer them support. I remember with my firstborn, when I started to change my thinking, this was about 15 years ago, when I was fundamentally making this shift. It happened to coincide with my own midlife crisis, which is not just a mere coincidence. It was my whole paradigm of life that I was changing. And I remember my son was experimenting with drugs, and I went to my therapist and I said, I told her the story. I told her how scared I was. And she said, when I was asking questions about what I might do, she said, well, what's your goal? And I thought about that, and I thought, I want to be a resource to my son. And she said, I think that's a really good thing to focus on when interacting with your son and when you're making decisions. And I went back and I stopped lecturing. I even let a couple of things slide. I didn't ignore them, but I just was gentle in my criticism, my critique, my feedback, my constructive feedback. I backed away from some of the consequences that I would have previously engaged in out of anxiety and fear for his future. And you know what he did? He started talking to me and telling me things that he never would have told me. And as he was talking to me and I was processing the information, because I thought, now he's telling me the truth. He's being open with me, but now I don't know what to do with that. And I was just thinking about that. He came to me during that period of time, and I don't know how long it lasted. It might have been just a few weeks. And he said, I've decided that I want to be sober. This is at 15, 16 years old. And he's been sober ever since. And he made some decisions listening to friends, and he shared them with me. I did have a contingency plan. Literally, I had the plan in my back pocket. Not figuratively. I had the phone numbers that I would call if it got too worrisome for me. If I was too frightened and too concerned, I was going to have him picked up and sent back to a program again, like I did when he was 14, 13 years old. So that still was available to me, but that shifted my whole parenting paradigm, not just as a dad, but as a therapist and one who works with families. If the parents use the creation of a contract to get clear on their values, if you use this to get clear about what you want, your boundaries, your limits, it definitely can be an effective tool. That's the one area that I think that a contract or an agreement can be effective. You using it, I've seen it work wonders in terms of co-parenting. But even when that's not been an issue, it helps you get clear about your reaction to things, your limits, and it can be effective in that way. But if the parent believes that this document, this contract, will remove the conflict from the relationship, they will inevitably discover it to be disappointing. In this way of thinking about a contract, parents may experience increased confidence. That's another thing that helps. If it gives you confidence, because I think some parents worry, maybe I haven't been clear. Now, I will tell you that when your child violates one of the rules on the contract, if you're thinking about it in the old way, they will find a loophole and tell you it wasn't clear. But I'm not talking about what they say. I'm talking about what you feel. If it gives you greater confidence, it can be an effective tool with regard to the stated boundaries that you have and the associated consequences. If it's used to this end, I've said before, I'll say again tonight, the document can be helpful to reduce guilt and increase your confidence, your clarity. But in our experience, there is no written document that will prevent the parent from having to do their work, principally to state and hold boundaries. And I think parents fantasize that if they get as clear as they can with this document, with the document of a home agreement or a contract, and they get their child to agree to it. By the way, a lot of times their children will agree to it in the context with that I work with parents with. They'll get their child to agree with it and sign it while in a program as a requirement to come home. And in those cases, almost without fail, when there's conflict later about the contract, the child will say, I signed it just to get home. And that's, in other words, I signed it under great duress. And if you took that contract to a judge and they were to pass judgment on it, they would tell you that the contract is void because there was too much leverage, too much of a power differential, and there was too much at stake for the child not to sign it. But even if that's not the issue, I think parents fantasize, and again, maybe like me, they might not know that they fantasize, that if they get everything written down and clear and stated, then that will remove all conflict. And I know I make kind of light of this when I say no child in the history of behavioral contracts, in my experience, has ever violated one of the rules of a contract, had that pointed out to them, looked at the contract and said, you know what? You're right. It states really clearly here, this rule, and I've clearly violated it. And I see the associated consequence, and I'm going to accept that without argument. Never has that happened. They want to renegotiate. They want to fight. They want to argue. They want to find the loopholes. They want to talk about that the agreement should be voided in the first place because of the leverage that was used for them to sign it, all of those things. So you still have to do the same work. You still have to stand up to your child, I guess is the idea. But maybe more specifically, stand up to the techniques that they employ to push your buttons that you've taught them to push. A lot of times when people talk about their children being specifically or particularly manipulative, I have the experience of saying, not for me, not really. They don't have access. Your children don't have access to my buttons for the most part. My children have access to them, but yours don't. Because we teach our children what works. And if it doesn't work, they stop doing it. That is simple human nature. So we design our children unknowingly to show us where our work still is. And if you struggle with fear and anxiety and guilt and shame and confusion and confidence, if you struggle with those things and your child is able to access, to find a way to heighten those feelings, which they will if they're paying attention at any level, they're showing you where your work is, where you still have work to do. So the contract, in my experience, almost does nothing to take away the inevitable stance, the inevitable position that you're going to have to maintain during conflict or challenges. Many parents hope that by constructing a contract, the subsequent process will be smooth and easy. That is, the terms of the contract and their consequences and privileges are clearly stated and agreed to, so there's no need for debate or capitulation. But anyone who has worked with families, this is what always surprised me. Virtually anybody that I've ever worked with who's worked with families will attest that virtually every such scenario where a child violates a stated rule, that they will be met with debate, the identifying of loopholes, and a strident lobby to renegotiate the terms of the contract. Many contracts are constructed, agreed to, and signed while the child is in treatment or while the child is experiencing some significant restriction of their freedoms, like I said earlier. And thus the motivation for signing the contract overshadow the internalization and the stated commitment. The child most often claims when a rule is violated that they signed the contract, like I said, under duress, just to get home. And like I mentioned, rationally speaking, they have a point. And any court of law would deem such a process voided since the contract was agreed to under a significant threat. Situations and circumstances are ever changing, and no contract can capture the nuances of a parent-child life and a child's development. Carl Jung observed, quote, "We cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie." And James Hollis, the great writer James Hollis, contemporary, added, "Any seeming resolution today will have to be revised tomorrow, for the psyche is a flowing river, and yesterday's resolution is tomorrow's constriction." It doesn't work to state an idea and put it in stone. You have to. I said this before. I finished a parent phone call, a parent session, where parents have come to a sense of clarity on a specific point, a specific stance, rule, consequence, what have you. Been very clear, very grounded. I've helped to facilitate that. They have hung up or ended the session with the utmost confidence. And inevitably, invariably, the parents will come back to me sometimes before the next session, sometimes the next day, sometimes later that evening, and say, "We talked to our daughter, we talked to our son, we talked to our child, and they had this comeback. They had this point. They identified this nuance, this missing piece of our idea. Now what do? We go over it again, right? Ideally, me helping them to take their values that they believe in and create something that feels operational, right? And practical. We do the same process and it happens over and over again. And eventually what we learn in this process is the parent is learning how to think. One of the reasons why I like the open forum that I do every other broadcast, when people ask me questions, and I've been told this by people in the past, is I get asked a question. And people that are watching live or even listening to the recording will pause. Maybe they'll pause the recording, or they'll just pause just within themselves and wonder how they might answer the question. Then they compare that with what I say subsequently. And not that what I say is the end all and be all truth of everything, but what they do is they use these broadcasts to try to think. That's the way I use them, and I'm the one presenting. That's how I use my own therapy sessions, right? The books that I read, the self-help books that I read, the books on psychology that are even more scholarly, or the 12-step meetings that I've attended. I use them to remind myself of a certain way of operating, a certain, I don't want to sound too obtuse, but like a vibration. I read last year or several months ago, I read the book by Rick Rubin called The Creative Act, and he's a facilitator with artists, famous artists of all genres and all mediums. And he talks about this idea of trying to get the artist to operate on a certain level, a certain vibration. He says, read classic literature, read the greats. And he's not talking about the greats even in their field. He's talking about the greats in any field. And he says, because they're operating at a higher vibration, at a higher wavelength. And you get into that mindset and your creative juices start flowing and you start to operate. And that's what this is about. That's what I mean by transformation. What Carl Jung said, we cannot live in the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what was in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie. And James Hollis added, any seeming resolution today will have to be revised tomorrow, for the psyche is a flowing river, and yesterday's resolution is tomorrow's constriction. You know that to be true, don't you? That's part of why you capitulate. Not all of it, but that's part of why you capitulate, because you have no information. I'm a different parent today than I was 5 years ago, and I was a year ago. And very different than I was 10 or 15 years ago when I was raising my two older children. So that's what this is trying to do. That's what we're trying to do. That's why we don't get really high on behavioral contracts, get very excited about them. That's why we don't feel like it's a really important thing to push on our parents in our curriculum with our coaches or our intensives or our wilderness therapy program. Research and experience have shown that families that identify themselves as successful in the parent-child area have fewer rules. The family and parents are value-based, flexible, clear, and capable of negotiation and evolution without emotionally charged capitulation, not out of fear or anxiety or, because so many of us have a fear of rejection, essentially an abandonment wound that is not completely healed. That's driving our behaviors and our parenting. We don't want to be abandoned and rejected by our children. And that anticipation, the fear of that, the anxiety of that, or the reality of that is so charged because it comes from our own undealt with trauma in childhood. As Alice Miller talks about in the drama of The Gifted Child, so many of us are trying to prevent something that already happened. And when parents say, I'm worried that my child will abandon me or not forgive me, I think to myself, I can understand that. First of all, that's the first thought I have. I can understand that. I have those same experiences myself. But the second thought that comes is, that's all backwards. By definition, a child really can't abandon you because it's not their job to be the parent, to take care of you. That part of it is kind of a one-way street. It's our job to take care of them. It's our job to be the adult in the relationship. So fewer rules is better. Find out what your 2 or 3 most important things. And remember this, I've talked about this before. The mistakes are important. The mistakes are important. I remember a couple of years ago, my daughter got in trouble for shoplifting. I wasn't happy about it. My first reaction was really upset. But I had time to process it before I saw her, and I think my reaction went well. It went well, and the exchange went well, and I didn't come down like a hammer on a nail like I used to. But what I found fascinating is after the conversation in the evening and later in the evening when I was with my adult children, every one of us talked about a story in our childhood in the past when we had shoplifted or stole something and what we had learned. And we all turned out okay, good enough, with integrity, and didn't become career criminals. You're going to be okay, mom and dad. If something bad happens, you'll be okay. And you need to make that your project, to know that, to remember that. If something befalls your child that is very hard, you'll be okay. You'll get through it. You'll find resources and people to support you. You'll get help. Hopefully you'll lean on the people that you've already engaged in your life that are there for you and your support, and you'll get through it. And on the other side of the crisis, the challenge, the difficulty, the trauma, on the other side of it, you won't be good enough. It won't be okay. You'll be stronger. As will your child. You'll be wiser. But we don't know that we're going to be okay. We really don't. There's so much anxiety in this world. We're so afraid. We think that everything is so high stakes. And that sense, that feeling, that way of being, we pass that on to their children. And they have some unconscious experience with something's wrong with me. For me to be causing so much distress to the people who love me by far more than anybody. You're going to be okay. You're okay. This is not a detour. Even where you're at right now is not a detour. It's not a side street. It's exactly where you need to be. Learning, talking about, and growing in the ways that you need to learn. So why use a home agreement, home contract? I came up with 4 reasons. For parents to focus on their progress. When you think about your child's relapse prevention plan, a very common assignment in treatment programs is a relapse prevention plan. Parents love it. Therapists love it. Me, I'm warm on it, right? I'm not hot on it. I'm not cold. I'm warm on it. It can be an effective tool. But I really love when parents worry about their regression, when parents worry about their relapse, their progress, their insights, their commitments to do their work. If you work on your progress, your insight, your commitments on your work, and your potential for relapse, the triggers and the red flags for your relapse, and you don't even do any of that with your child, I promise you, virtually everything in your family's life will be better. Use this tool if it helps you to discuss and prioritize the most important values in your family. Respect, education, positions on substance use. I tend to discourage zero tolerance, which gets very confusing because we know that relapse is a part of recovery. But right when we say that, we think that then becomes an excuse. But we can be more sophisticated and nuanced than that. We can. I know we can. We can understand the humanness of the child. We can understand our own humanness. Think about it. If you came up with your rules for yourself, and some of them was to not yell or to not use sarcasm. Pick your list of obviously unmistakable unhealthy behaviors with regard to parenting. And what if someone looked at you with this zero tolerance? I like to think about what I heard somebody share one time. It's the difference between a flare-up and a full-blown relapse. A flare-up means that the behavior has resurfaced. The child is using, we've been triggered, we've yelled, whatever the behavior is. That's a flare-up. A relapse, on the other hand, is a full-blown devolving into the old kind of thinking and not wanting to get out. Becoming entrenched and stuck in the old ways of thinking. Use this tool if it helps you to discuss and prioritize your important values. In contrast to a zero tolerance, I like the idea of we are not okay with drug use. And if this is a repeated problem, we're going to have to make decisions that are based on this value. We're not going to be okay with it. That's the discussion I've had with my 15-year-old. And it is such a better environment, such a better relationship, such a better dialogue around this issue than it was with my firstborn. Before that fateful experience that I shared with you earlier, soon after which he decided to be sober. We're not okay with drug use. I'm not okay with children using drugs in my, under my supervision in my life. No, am I going to send you away if I catch you? Not necessarily. But if it's a pattern, if it escalates, if we can't get past this, maybe I'll have to do something like that, or even that specifically. We believe therapy is very personal and it's a difficult process. And it's our experience at Evoke that forcing a child to go to individual therapy when they are not motivated will have little positive effect, and maybe even significant negative effects, such as an aversion to therapy later in life. Family therapy, on the other hand, can be an exception to that. But this is not merely a therapist that is just going to carry the baton for the parent, but to support all the family members, to encourage healthy communication, and to hold everybody, most importantly the parents, to hold everybody in the family accountable for their commitments and for their progress and for their well-being. I'm not telling you what to do. All 4 of my children, in the past 10 years, I have not forced any of my children to go to therapy. And in the last 10 years, all 4 of my children have gone to a lot of therapy. Not because it's a punishment, not because I think that they're crazy, not because I want to fix them, but because they understand that healthy people go to therapy. It's somebody that is trying to become more aware, more conscious, goes to therapy. That there's value in finding that person that for 1 hour a week will listen to what you have to say without judgment, without anxiety, without a reaction, without an urge to fix you, but rather with an interest in supporting you to become who you are. Parents will use the creation of the home agreement to communicate with each other. That's another effective tool, like I mentioned. Use this as a tool to become clear with each other and get clear, maybe with the use of a coach or a therapist, to have a discussion. It's a great tool for a discussion. When parents and the facilitator believe that it is time, the parents can orally discuss the contract or the home agreement with the child. I don't even think it's that important to get them to agree or to get them to sign it. Especially if you follow the other ideas of less is more. Especially if it's more principle-based. Especially if it's not based on a zero tolerance philosophy, but rather a commitment, a family, a parental value, and a way of operating. It can be effective in those circumstances towards those ends. Another more central objection to the creating of a contract is that the parent-child relationship and its quality of attachment is more important than to the child's development and well-being. The research to this point is vast. I've mentioned this all throughout. If you want a great source of explaining what I'm talking about and heavily cited research, read Hartzell and Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out. Reducing a child to their behaviors tends to interrupt that attachment and create a sense of disconnection, a power struggle. Having said all that I've said tonight, I'm going to share those that are watching. And if you're just listening on the podcast app, you can always go to our YouTube screen, our YouTube channel, and watch and look at the slides there. You can always ask for any of the slides. You can email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. We'll offer you any of the slides that I use on any of the broadcasts. And I did create many years ago, when I was less aversive to this idea of a contract, I created some basic parameters. I talked about have a starting point. Get clear about the starting point. Give credit for work that's done. Understanding that sometimes, I've done this with my daughter, smaller consequences are almost more effective with my daughter because there's still hope. And I might be removing a little bit of the privilege, but I'm not engaging in the power struggle, that hammer to the nail kind of mentality. And she wants the ultimate freedom. So you take away the negatives. I give her some positives, or I allow her to keep some positives, and there can be work there. There can be motivation there. There can be hope there. If you have more big rules than 5, I would start to question. And again, this isn't just my theory. This is the research that I studied in graduate school, getting a doctoral degree in marriage and family therapy. Parents that identify themselves as successful have fewer rules. Now, part of that, I made the point at the time, was that's because they have less conflict and kids aren't acting out as in such extraordinary or dangerous ways. We have to account for that. But I also believe that it's a different kind of a family. It's a different way of operating. It's a higher vibration. Be specific instead of general. Even in with all that I've said tonight, when we have privileges associated with grades, and they're very specific, have positive and negative consequences. In other words, they can earn more and more freedom, less and less supervision, more and more liberation, of course, to the point that you feel comfortable. But even that phrase, to the point that you feel comfortable, it depends, right? It depends if your comfort level is inordinately affected by your trauma history. And for most of us, especially if you haven't done a lot of work, that's a fact. That's true. So even in that instance, the phrase "tell you feel comfortable" has in it some subjective, flawed input. That's why it's so important to do your work. But try to come up with positive consequences, more freedoms. Natural and logical consequences are better than contrived. I struggle with creativity sometimes. I can get locked into you're either grounded or you're not. I'm going to take away your phone or you're not. But try to have them related. Try to have them be more about teaching than just about the aversion of the consequence itself, ideally. Understand where there's room for negotiation, where there's not. It's appropriate to have negotiation. And it's appropriate in some situations with some circumstances and some specifics to not have negotiation. And you get to decide. But be clear about which is which. Because if you're not, you're going to be negotiating things that you don't want to be negotiating. Try to find as much unification as possible. And if you can't be unified, at least be respectful. Find a way to agree on things in the shared parenting realm, if you will. And then again, I like the idea of tiered consequences, like I said. It's not all or nothing. It's not that you have total freedom or none. It's that you might be grounded or not be able to go out just for the weekend if you come home late. And again, if you're worried that the consequence isn't stiff enough, and if your ego gets involved and you're thinking, I'm not going to be duped, I'm not going to be fooled, I'm not going to be the weak one here, I'm not going to be the doormat, there's work there. That's ego. That has very little to do with the child's well-being. But make them tiered, right? Small to begin with. When people ask me, what do you say in this situation? What do you do in this situation with a child? My first response is you talk to them. But then the parent would say, well, I've tried that. And then I say, well, then you limit some privileges and consequences. Then they say, I've tried that. And eventually you get to this point where you might have to take more extreme measures. So if you want that, we can provide that. So what are the take homes for this evening? Doesn't matter what you call it. The agreement or the contract won't do the work for you. That's my biggest idea for take home this evening. It will not take away the difficulty of the work. It can be an effective tool to get clear, to get confident, to chip away at the guilt that you might feel when you have to enforce something you've said. Try to make it principle-based. It's more difficult to make it principle-based, but it encourages learning. In other words, what's important? What's the most important? It's like in psychotherapy. It's not very helpful for the therapist to make a comment on everything that's said in an hour-long session. I teach young therapists, just find the most important thing, maybe two things in a session, and make your points there, intervene there. But don't intervene on every thinking error, on every difficulty or challenge with language or ideas or thought. If you do too much, it becomes the individual in therapy or the child in this experience doesn't understand what's important and what's not. Learn to let go of the small things and learn to then take care of yourself, because you're going to be frustrated when you let go. But if you're holding on tight to everything, your child doesn't know what's really important and what's not. They don't know how to prioritize. And without a prefrontal cortex, which adolescents by definition don't have, without a prefrontal cortex, beginning to learn what's important and what's not is important. It's valuable. It's neurologically shaping their brain. And if you're reacting to everything evenly, the child loses interest, loses focus. And they learn and they realize in reality that that's about you. Your children can't articulate what I'm about to say, but they know it at an unconscious level. Your anxiety, your undealt with trauma renders your parenting invalid in a sense. In other words, if your reaction is big and angry and hysterical, like I say from Al-Anon, if it's hysterical, it's historical. If you have reactions that are inordinately reactive and your nervous system is highly dysregulated, your child knows. My children know it at a very conscious level because we talk like this. But even the family, even the child that doesn't talk like this will realize at some level, my mom or my dad is in there crazy right now. Less is more when it comes to rules. We have rules when it comes to, I think, just two things. School and substances, really. If something comes up, that's another thing about a contract. If something comes up, like being disrespectful or yelling at me or taking something out of my wallet without asking, I'm going to deal with that. That's another problem with contracts is the child will find something that's not in there. They'll sign a version of something that's not in there. I don't want to think of every possible contingent behavior. I don't want to be held to that. That doesn't lead to a sane life, in my opinion, as a parent educator, as a therapist, and as a parent. And most importantly, attachment is more important than behavior. Maintaining the relationship, taking care of yourself, solving, resolving, dealing with your own trauma, your own anxiety, your own mood disorders, your own self-medicating behaviors, all that is yours, dealing with that stuff so that you can be present with your child in a connected, securely attached way is by far more important than the good and bad behavior. And that is something that if you don't unlearn, you'll forever be spinning your wheels. All right, folks. I hope that was helpful. With regard to upcoming events and announcements, my two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, in the vein of what we've been talking about, I attempt to talk about how to think about parenting and relationships and selfhood. They're both available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, Finding You is our offering. If at all you feel any worry about the conflict of interest of me selling a product, go to on-site workshops. Go to the House at Akala with Judy Crane. Go to the Survivors Program at the Meadows. Go to the Karen Foundation, their Breakthrough Program. Any program that helps you look back and understand your childhood, your programming, your trauma, the soup that you were cooked in, and how it's manifesting itself today in positive and negative ways. Anyone who does that, do that work. Our version is finding you. I'm preferential toward ours, but if there's any conflict, go to those. October 18th is our next offering, 18th through 22nd. We also have an online offering. It's half the time and about a third of the cost, November 10th through 12th. We have a new offering in New York City. I'll have more information about this upcoming. But in New York City, we have a young adult all-day intensive. It's in Manhattan, in Midtown, East Side, I think. Maybe it's the Upper East Side. November 4th. It's going to be run by Emma Reedy, my daughter, and she's a fantastic facilitator who was specifically requested by a group to do this. 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., November 4th, Young Adult Intensive. Contact Becky at evoketherapy.com if you have any more questions, you want to find out more. If you've done a Finding You and you want to come back for more, Returning to You is that offering. The next available time slot is March 6th through 10th. Our October session is full with a waiting list, and the March one is filling up. I will be running that one also. And then, of course, I mentioned the Finding Connection workshop. If you want to do a custom Finding Connection for a couple or for a co-parenting situation, or you want to do a Finding Family intensive custom version, contact intensives at evoketherapy.com to learn more. I have a conscious parenting seminar this week, Friday, September 29th, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. I think we might have one spot left if you're interested. Contact us at intensives at evoketherapy.com. But look forward to that. We have support groups for current and alumni parents. If you are a current or an alumni parent, September 28th, that's 2 days from now at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, is our next offering. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting. The next offering for that is October 24th at 6:30 p.m. And then we have an intensive support group once a month. October 10th at 6 p.m. is that next offering. Visit evoketherapy.com/family-involvement for more information about our support groups. If you want to do a family trek, that's a multi-day experience with a family in the field, in the wilderness, to experience in a way what your child has experienced if they've been to wilderness therapy. This can be in the middle of your program. This can be at the end of the program. This can be before coming home, or this can be even if you haven't had a child at the program. If you want a therapeutic adventure experience as a family that's therapeutic, contact admissions at evoketherapy.com for more information on our family treks. If you want a coach, coaching at evoketherapy.com is the place to go. Coaches that can help you work on codependency, your own trauma, everything that I've talked about tonight. Our coaches are trained in the attachment-based model. We have over 40 coaches to match you up with. Check them out. We ask all current parents to just try at least 6 of any combination of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. Also, RefugeRecovery.org is a Buddhist-inspired option, less of an emphasis on a higher power. And the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local community. If you haven't gone to that, if I've suggested that and you've heard and you haven't gone, you start to get a sense of what resistance feels like. And the same excuses that parents have for not going to those are the same excuses that the identified patient has for not doing their work or not wanting to get treatment. It doesn't apply to me. I'm doing fine. I don't need help. These people are different. The excuses are the exact same. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there by searching Finding You. You can also go to Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the rebroadcast there. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. And Evoke Intensives is on Instagram. You can find us there by using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week from staff across the Evoke spectrum. If you want to give back for people that can't afford treatment, your tax-deductible donation, we encourage you to reach out to choosementalhealth.org, sky'sthelimitfund.org, or evokefamilyfoundation.org. These are the 3 charitable partners that we work with that we raise money for and that we donate to. You can earmark your donation, your tax-deductible donation, for a specific population or a specific program if those things are near and dear to your heart. My next broadcast, I won't be doing another one this week. My next broadcast will be October 5th. That's next week at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. It'll be a live Q&A. Any questions left over from this evening, any questions you have in between, anything you send to webinar@evoketherapy.com, I'm happy to address during that live broadcast, and you can invite your family and friends to that one, October 5th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. All right, folks, I hope this has been a helpful point of contact and a helpful perspective in thinking about home agreements, how they work, how they don't work. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up to broadcasts like this, to listening to broadcasts like this and doing your work. It makes a great difference. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.